Okay. Hello. Happy Monday and happy Memorial Day. As you know, today is a day to damn, my voice is doing its thing again. A day to remember loved ones. Um, so we're gonna have Youssef Slayman on to talk about that topic. He's on his way. He's gonna come as soon as he gets set up. So, dang, like it's getting worse. Um, a few announcements. Today is our men's group at our weekly men's group at 6 p.m. Central. If you need the link to that, as usual, primalhex at gmail.com or on Twitter. I can get you the link. We talk about men's issues, mental health. We shoot the bull. We cut up. We have fun. So if you want to come hang out with the men's, get with me. Tomorrow, we're going to start the Watchmen series, HBO series, at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Central as well. And we're going to do like a few episodes on Tuesdays and Fridays until we finish the series. So if you want to be a part of that, and it's a really, really good series, again, contact me for the link. I would post the links, but I've gotten spam before when I post them publicly like that. So I'd rather people just contact me individually and I'll send out the link. And it seems like there's one more announcement, but I can't quite think of it right now. The Gender Fucks, P.F. Jung, John Pike, Anton Edwards, part of the P.F. Jung show, has moved to Wednesdays, and they're gonna again at 6 p.m. They're gonna be streaming for an hour, and then we're gonna have an after show discussion on the Discord, and that's gonna be a weekly thing. So also, if you want to participate with that, contact me, and I can get you set up for that. This is all on my calendar, by the way, that I pinned to my Twitter profile. We 2 more days of mental health month. Thursday. I mean, here's Youssef. Okay, the next 2 days are the last 2 days of mental health month. So if you want to come and talk, just let me know. And here is Youssef.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, you're very stylish today.
Thank
Stylish
you.
hat. Happy Memorial Day.
Well, wishing the best on Memorial Day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly a happy holiday for a lot of individuals today, but that's part of what we're here to talk about, right?
Yes, exactly. I read your article, and
Yeah.
so I
It's
guess
not
we
an
well, if you go ahead.
well, and it's not an easy topic to talk about too, right? As a culture, it becomes a we don't have a group mourning process, a group mourning habit. I mean, I understand Irish wakes or funerals, but those are events.
Yeah.
Grieving's a process.
Yes, you're right. Um,
So, what is on your mind today?
you and talking with you. So I figured if you want, you can say a little bit about yourself and your background and give an introduction for those who may not know you. We know each other from the gifted community.
That's right. Hi, everybody. I'm Youssef Slayman. I'm one of the members of a group called Bright Insight Support Network. And we are out there trying to raise awareness and support for gifted and twice exceptional individuals. Twice exceptional being anyone who may have ADHD, autism, and giftedness at the same time. So I'm a writer in the Dallas Metroplex, and gosh, what else is there to say about me? I wrote this thing about grief. Mental health is not just a hobby. I'm also a customer.
Do you do you want to take the article as a starting point, maybe, and
Perhaps,
start?
yeah. What
I,
did as as someone who's experienced that serious grief process yourself, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that article is trying to answer for people? How
my impression of the article, some of it did not resonate with me, and it was actually the complete opposite of what I did find helpful when I was going through
oh,
grief. It's important to emphasize grief is a very individualized process, so you can't
mm,
really be dogmatic about how to approach
of
grief. There's no
course.
rules or guidebook to it. What I've run into
Mm-hmm.
this before. I'm going to tell the Kleenex story. Here in Seattle, I was in a training on how to facilitate groups, and there were
Mm-hmm.
maybe 30 or 40 of us in the training. And one day they told us that they were very serious and about it. If you're running a group and somebody starts crying, do not hand them a Kleenex. Don't pass the Kleenex box to them. And almost instantly at the same time, there were three of us in the group that started like objecting and raising our hands. I was one of them. And I'm like, I'm from Louisiana. We hand each other Kleenex all the time, and it's nothing but appreciated. And the two other people that were having the same reaction, it turns out, were also from Louisiana. So all three of us were
Oh,
realizing that we manage that convention in a completely different way. And so we voiced this to the facilitator, and his response was, well, then you're doing it wrong. And of course, I pitched a fit and got furious. And um, so grief,
yeah.
what the perspective of this article reminded me of that. It's coming from a very specific cultural perspective or
Mm,
viewpoint. And because grief is so individualized and idiosyncratic, I think
mm,
you can take it maybe as a guide or suggestion, because also it's that middle of the curve phenomena again. I think she's like statistically or normatively, this is what tends to help with grief. But every person that's grieving is going to be different. You'll have neurodivergent people grieving. You'll have outliers. And so I think the important takeaway is the that to take a person-centered approach and know the individual person you're trying to help. I mean, chances are it's a friend, it's someone you know well, maybe it's a coworker. I don't know how much you would invest helping a remote stranger with grief on that level. So you probably know something about this person. So use your knowledge of that person as a guide more than anything else, I would
mm.
say. And let me pull up the article. The some of the
Please
things,
do. Yeah.
it seemed very like a little rigid and prescriptive. Um, but some of the things I did like as well. The main thing that stuck out with me was, and just comparing it to my own experience with grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me find it.
And
Oh, mainly
oh,
the
go.
part, especially as a peer or peer supporter, of not to share your own experiences with grief. When I was grieving, every person I connected to that was going through a similar story was an additional comfort and support to me to hear their experiences. And she's saying, don't
Mm,
mention your experiences at all, like, and center it on theirs. I remember probably a few months after my loss, I had a friend come in with his mom, and they stayed 4th of July with me. And it turns out his mom had recently lost her husband, his stepdad.
mm,
And we were all sitting around one night, and she was sharing that with me and telling me about it. And I instantly felt closer to her. And she became such a source of strength for me on that weekend, because it's like every person I had met from that point forward that was grieving or had suffered a loss, I felt this instant bond and connection. They were now my people. And hearing
mm,
their stories of grief and loss helped to give perspective on mine. It helped to set it in a larger context. So I found it very helpful. And as a peer, that's what we do. We share our experiences with the same thing that the person I'm working with is going through so that they don't feel all alone. It builds
Mm,
trust, it destigmatizes the event. So that's one thing that was contrary to my experience. And the other one was the part, and it's really minor, about not like helping with specific tasks. For me, I didn't
yeah,
know what I needed help with or not. So anybody that
right.
came offered to help was appreciated. And my standard response when somebody suffered a loss is let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I put out this because I want them to know I'm here, I'm available. I don't know
Hmm.
what you, but if you discover that you need something I'm able to provide, I'm here for that and let me know.
That's great.
No,
And
I did
every
like the
single point
part.
is exactly nailed on how personalized the experience is.
It's nonlinear. It takes its own
Hmm.
path. It has its own kind of, I don't want to say life cycle because I don't think it ever ends, but it has its own
No.
cycle. It's
Yeah.
individual to each person. Everybody. The best thing you can do for grief is just be there,
Hmm.
be supportive, and kind of take your cue from the person themselves. I do like how she said to just be honest and transparent about your feelings. If you don't know something, just say you don't know it. If you have a question, say the question. If you're not sure what to offer what you do know and let them decide how to receive it. And the naming of your feelings part, I think, is very.
Mm. I'm still pulling up the article. Do you want to say who she is when you say
Well, I
she?
know her as Barbara. I think she was kind of anonymous. She was a grief counselor that you interviewed. She had been working with grief for 10 years. And that's really all I know about her.
Oh, hang on a
But she
minute
was a
though.
professional.
So, yeah, let me set up some of the context for that article. Once I've got it open, wherever that
Okay.
went. I mean, the funny thing is, it looks like I totally wrote it and it existed. Where it went, I
Do you
don't know.
do you need a link for it? I can
Oh, I've
shoot you a
got
link.
it. It just took
Okay.
me a minute. So, Memorial Day is the day in which America honors our fallen veterans. That's the nuance that most companies and organizations miss. It's a day to remember those who have passed. Many organizations, your average mattress store, is going to treat it just like a Veterans Day, where, hey, if you're a veteran, come in and get 90% off on Memorial Day. Well,
90%.
it's not that type of a holiday for veterans. This is the day where every veteran looks over and remembers the people who have passed, the people they've lost. And you're right, it is an awkward state to be in when we as a group or a large community might try to reach out and offer comfort to someone we don't know well, when it's a stranger, when
Hmm.
it's somebody who is trying to be supportive on the holiday because they know what it's about, but they're new to the grief process. They didn't experience a serious grief process. That's where I started, because on Memorial Day, I had worked through a lot of grief from my own story, my own history, and I thought, all right, um, how do I explain to somebody who has not had any of those grief experiences, who doesn't exactly understand some of the pressure points that someone who is suffering through grief may feel? And that's when I reached out to a veteran counselor. She wanted to stay anonymous, but she works for the shoot. It's not Department of Defense. Yeah, so this is a certified clinical trauma professional and a certified clinical social worker. And she had to go by anonymous, but she's a grief counselor who serves veterans for one of these, the organization I did not get to list, but it is do 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 do.
Is it the VA?
It is the VA, but there's a special branch of it. Anyway, it's the person you call when it's like 1-800, I need help right now with the VA. So she's one of their immediate call answers to help somebody who is going through grief. So she's trained in doing what these average strangers on Memorial Day are being tasked to do. Like
Mhm.
we on Memorial Day are needing to remember and honor those who have passed. And when we do that, like we're doing that shoulder to shoulder with somebody who has known that person. Either it's the family, the surviving family, it's a Gold Star family, somebody who has to do that work, but they may be doing it alone. So, yes, very much an individualized grief process for that person going through it. Somebody who is standing on the side, how do I help somebody? What would be helpful? Using your ears and your eyes, paying attention, see what that person needs more than anything else. One of the most interesting things that she shared with me was um, how often people try to not say anything about grief, not say anything about the person who's fallen, not say anything about the person who's had any loss. Like if you had lost this family member, like, I am so sorry, and that's about it. Give them a chance to talk about that person. If that's appropriate, if that feels right, use your ears and your eyes every time. Like listen for what their emotional needs are. Another part that is important to point out, like um, sometimes the Gold Star family is someone who lost a father, and there is a mother, and she's raising the two other kids that are surviving, and somebody will come alongside and go, "Yeah, I lost my dog once." Not to diminish that loss for the person who lost their dog, it is not the same. Don't share that type of a grief message. Instead, leading with an empathetic, thoughtful eye, like, oh, yeah, like just because you lost your credit card one time and you kind of remember the panic, it's not the same loss. But psychologically speaking, and this is where the article took an interesting turn for me. I wrote this in 2019. I'd been going through a lot of different layers of loss for my story. And um, because Memorial Day is specifically for those who have fallen who are part of the military and who fell during service, um, that is a major loss. It is also like a singular event for the survivor, right? But every loss, no matter how minor, is added to it unless you deal with it. And so I was asking her, as a grief counselor, as someone who is clinically trained to handle somebody who needs emotional first aid right now and who knows how to lead them into the next couple of steps, like as a social worker, she's assigning these people to cases where what is the next step after that emotional support. What she shared with me was the I want to find those tasks of grieving. Yeah, learning about how grief works. Ah, yeah, you're right. It's Veteran Affairs. So that 1-800 number I was sharing, I can find it. Boop, 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 boop. It's down at the very end.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah,
can put
it's
in the
the veteran.
description.
Thank you. It's the Veteran Crisis Hotline. So let's go ahead and plug it right now. It is free, confidential, round the clock hotline that helps veterans and families in moments of crisis. That number, if that is you, 1-800 273 8255. That's 1-800 873 or
273.
273 8255. And there's also a confidential call center if you are a combat veteran who just needs to talk about your experience with someone who gets it. And that is 1-877 War Vets. Now, she shared with me the tasks of grief. I think one of the funniest things about this cultural awareness, And yeah, I'm going to say it's funny, but in the kind of dark humor way, is that our culture heard this notion and was like, oh, yeah, that's the way to deal with grief. And that notion was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief.
Oh,
Anyone
mhm.
kind of remembers that, right? Like the stages of grief. Poor Dr. Kubler-Ross spent, I don't know, the last decade and a half of her life fighting against the idea that this is for the living. Those stages of grief are not for the living. Those are those stages of grief if you are facing your own
Mhm.
mortality. But people have taken that stages of grief and made it a Netflix series. We made that all of these other attributes. We're going to use this as counseling. We've even used this stages of grief for how we face our own mortality as a way to work through corporate changes. Really? That's not where we're gonna go. Like that's not right. Instead, the thing that Barbara shared with me was here's how many of the here's how a proper grief counselor is going to kind of start you off with it. Like understanding how grief works. There's a four tasks of grieving by Dr. William Warden and Therese Rando. And Warden's stages of grieving or tasks of mourning, um, those are shared now. I believe he has an institute. What those four stages are not, they're again like using the stages of grief that we're all familiar with. They're not linear, they're not something you do once and you're done, but they are the four different tasks. So think about it in terms of like four different points in a square that you need to touch every one of those points at some point, and it will reduce the pain a little bit. You're never done, you're never finished, but in order to work through grief, the four tasks, let me make sure I'm reading this because I don't want to be wrong. Um, four tasks, according to Dr. Warden: accepting the reality of the loss, like naming the truth, saying the reality. And then number two, mourning, actually feeling the feelings, taking the time to feel them. Acknowledging is one thing, feeling it is another.
Mhm.
Then these two were the most revolutionary for me. Adjusting your environment. What is immediately around you? This would be akin to hanging up the gold star or the blue star. This would also be akin to rearranging the refrigerator, moving clothes, changing furniture, anything about your physical environment. So just refresh: accepting the loss, feeling the feelings, adjusting your environment. Number four is forming that new identity, reinvesting that energy, the emotional energy, into some new outlet. Now, we can all think back to minor losses, lowercase L losses, where, yeah, if you did lose a pet, you needed to accept the reality. You needed to rearrange your environment. You may have like started reinvesting the energy, but if you never spent any time feeling the feelings, that's the one unfinished task. Go back and go through that. And then you'll later on need to revisit all four of those things again. Which piece of your environment needs to change? Which part of your feelings have you not explored or expressed? And when it comes to like a major loss, like the loss of a family member, a mother who has a mother, a wife, spouse, a sister who has served the country and fallen in the line of duty, and uh, now how do we carry on as single parents, as family members, as surviving brothers and sisters? Feel the feelings, adjust your environment, um, accepting the loss. And sometimes the accepting of the loss can trip us up because, factually, you get a letter, you have a certificate, you need to file this piece of paper, you did that on your taxes. The reality shows up in facts and figures. And for at least the first year and a half, you're feeling you're seeing a lot of the reality, right? It's hard to avoid the paperwork. But 5 years, 6 years down the road, you may feel like you have moved on in some way. Accepting the reality is being able to say to yourself that this person was part of my story, was part of my life, and I lost them. And that's part of my reality. Now, on Memorial Day, sometimes strangers are going to come up to you if you were a veteran and say things like, hey, I loved listening to Barbara tell me about all of the worst things that people say on Memorial Day. Oh man, where was she? Uh,
There was one
right.
part about like, why aren't you over it yet? It's been 50
That was
years.
that was the one that got me because some of her most recent ones, the generations have shifted, so she stopped getting as many like post World War II emergency conflict, and then was getting a lot of Vietnam vets, and now she's getting some Gulf Coast veterans who served in the Gulf War, and um, yeah, the getting over it piece. She was working with people who were in their 90s, strong, healthy individuals who were still working through it. It is not an easy thing to finish. Grief is, let's take a minute and talk about what it is. Um, I've recently been studying B.F. Skinner's psychology, and B.F. Skinner, if anyone is interested, he's one of the three fathers of modern psychology. This is the guy who made it popular for your kindergarten teacher to give you gold stars. It's where we get terms like positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And negative reinforcement is probably what we could call, no, negative reinforcement is not what we call grief. But we want this connection with somebody. We've sometimes found it either, so with some of the World War II vets, it was like a loss of a connection that they would have had after the war. How might my life have changed? What would I have done had she survived or he survived? Sometimes you have that experience, and that feeling of loss is complicated with all of those other memories. It's not just the person you're grieving an entire reality that you perceived, that you had, and now all of the feelings associated with that are gone. For me, sometimes that's where my head goes when I think about the loss of children. Like knowing that entire future is what you're grieving. You're not just grieving the immediate person, you're grieving all of the possibilities, all of those things. All of that is part of grief, is part of loss. Loss is this connection we wanted to keep and maintain, and for whatever reason, cruel, happenstance, otherwise, we've lost that connection. And working through those feelings is not simple. And that's why Memorial Day as a holiday can be a difficult one for Americans. We don't have that social, like I was saying at the beginning, we don't necessarily have some of those social norms at play. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the families, and I love the communities around military bases, because that is a community that knows, that gets it, that has grief counselors trained and coming together. But that's why some of these retired veterans who come back from the VFWs and are like, why are my neighbors so insensitive? I'm doing this. I'm taking care of something on my lawn. I need to do this ritual on this day. And they were going to come and talk to me or manage a barbecue on this day or something. No, I don't have the interest or the time. But more than anything else, hearing that this individual you're talking to is going through grief, listening to them, sometimes even prompting them to tell them that you're willing to listen is the
Hmm.
most helpful way. And so if you're on LinkedIn, you can look up my article. It's titled How to Help a Friend Through Grief
I
on
put it
Memorial
in the
Day.
description too.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So Barbara has been doing veteran counseling for 10 years as of 2019. So that'd be 15 years now. And Barbara, if you're out there, I'm glad we kept your name anonymous and didn't point them back to you. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that expression with me, Barbara. The conversation we had a couple that ran for a couple hours, but it was so good. And it took me the article is not short. You go through a lot. We go through a lot. But no matter how many years it has been for somebody, mm, always say and acknowledge that loss because it's
And
real for them no matter how many years it's been.
it's always going to be real. Grief changes you. Like a person's never the same after grief, especially if it was like a really significant loss than they are before. So they're never going to, if you keep looking for them to bounce back to the person they were before, it's
Yeah.
that person is not coming back. And I'm struck
Mm-hmm.
by how much of these the four tasks kind of support each other and feed into each other. Like adjusting to, I remember adjusting to the environment and having to go through everything, and it helped me accept the loss. It helped me to feel those feelings. Or
Mm.
finding the new identity after helped me to adjust to the environment. So they're kind of all interlocked with each other. And you're right that being willing to listen, like just letting someone know it's okay if you need to talk about it. Like talking about it really helped me because it is part of your story, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
articulate that story not only to others but to yourself, and having the
Yes.
space to do that is something that's continually needed. Like that process never really ends. So to the extent you can provide a space for that, I think that's something that's universally helpful. Although again, I don't want to be dogmatic about any of this.
No. And I think it's important that the tasks of mourning are things that we share with each other, but a lot of the prescriptive work in in my article are really for the individuals who may show up and do the most insensitive thing possible. If you're worried about being insensitive, check out the article. If you know this person, embrace them. You know how to step in. If you're willing to share, go for it. And at the same time, uh, one of the most helpful things I found was hilariously something that kind of came alongside the conversation I had with Barbara. There's a model for grief and a model for how do I say it? Like how to not say the wrong thing. This is a theory from Susan Silk and Barry Goldman. They popularized it in 2013 in the LA Times, and it's a ring theory. The idea is that in the middle of pain, think about ripples in a pond. Your grieving friend is in the dead center of that pain, right? Bloop, and then the pond has ripples. You have people around that individual who are also hurt by that pain, whatever it is. The rule is you speak comfort into the circle, you emotionally dump outside of the circle. If you are someone who's like a friend of the family, I think about this with like the Adams family. Think about like all the different concentric circles that are around that. You have Uncle Lurch, or the Lurch is the butler, or
Uncle Fester, and
Uncle.
yeah, I think
Yeah, you
Lurch
have
was the butler.
Uncle Fester is in one circle. Lurch, I appreciate how close he is to the family. He is an employee. He is in an outside circle. So Lurch can speak comfort into it, but as soon as Lurch starts dumping about how he, has to get his bolts changed every so often, and he's dealing with like pain in some way, Lurch has his own pain to go deal with. You go somewhere else. Don't dump in toward the circle. And a lot of individuals may think, I need to match this other person's feeling in some way. I'm surprised often, like when we talk about gifted and twice exceptionality in the bright insight space, we're often talking about neurodivergent individuals and neurotypical individuals. And neurodivergent pure simply means that they think differently, they operate differently. And neurotypical represents a large chunk of humanity. Well, 90% may, I'm going to lower that down a bit. 80% of humanity generally has this thing that we call living work, like they match up in general. So you go out dancing with them, they will kind of match that energy. This is why they love sports. They'll like match that same energy. They love to match energy and share that emotional feelings. But if you are burying a pet on Sunday and then on Monday, it's Memorial Day on Monday today. On Monday, you meet somebody who is hurting because of a lost loved one. You may feel like, oh, I need to match energy. I can dump to them about my pain. No, don't dump in toward pain. You dump out and then you speak comfort in. So I can imagine, describe to me what the storytelling was like when when your friend shared her loss, when you were dealing with your own. What was that conversation like? What was the shape of it?
We were sitting in the hot tub, and just the three of us just talking, and hot tubs can tend to be intimate and close, and you have conversation. And so I don't know, it was like she made herself really vulnerable, and it matched my vulnerability. Like I have to say, as an empath, I tend to match energy too, and as a peer, I tend to match energy. So I will say that everybody that did try to support me after grief, I truly believe was well intentioned. Even if it was not the
Yes.
exact thing or the exact phrase, I think it was coming from a good place and they were doing the best that they knew how to
Mm-hmm.
do. One thing that threw me off about the article, speaking of neurodivergence, is there was this thing about and this was kind of with the Kleenex box too, because this was their justification for not handing someone a Kleenex box, that it sends a certain signal or message. And I'm thinking, being autistic, those signals don't mean anything to me. How does any person know what signal they may or may not be sending and how it's going to be received? So that's like that hidden world that I don't even have access to.
Yeah.
And I don't worry about it. It seemed to all revolve around the signals or messages that might be sent, and she seemed very certain, like exactly what those signals were going to be in every case, and everybody's going to receive those signals exactly as she's describing. And so that kind of threw me off too. I'm like, people like me, I can't do anything with this advice at all. I don't
Mm.
even know what she's talking about, like sending signals.
And it may be worth pointing out law of averages, right? When we talk about, like Jeff is neurodivergent, I'm neurodivergent. He and I need different advice than most people. Frankly, yeah. And that's where it became clear to me I needed to start a whole path. I wrote this article in 2019, and that really was part of my neurodivergent awakening when I started taking some of my own mental health seriously. And along with mental health seriously, I had to take some truths about myself very seriously. And you're exactly right. For Barbara in at the VFW, if she's dealing with 80 calls a day,
Mm-hmm.
16-hour shifts sometimes, and truly, if you get, we do need more individuals doing that work because there's a lot of people. But when you are, I'm going to call it the short order cook of grief counseling, you're going through a lot of humans. And when she's speaking, I think it's important for you and I to know that as much as she comes across as dogmatic, like truly she is empathic. She's paying attention. She'll listen. I mean, as a counselor, you talk about what you know works and what doesn't. You don't dump in if you need to go from somewhere else. All of that advice is coming from years of training and expertise and managing, but our individual experience, that always is the starting point. I mean, she would be the first to tell you none of this advice is intended to be dogmatic, 100%, going to do it all the time. Instead, consider it more of a posture or a stance that you're going to take when you realize somebody, when you hear the words that somebody is going through hurt. I mean, sometimes signals are spoken. We don't hear it. Sometimes somebody will say, I am here because I have lost a loved one during that war, during Iraq. Well, if you forget and you walk away and you wish them a happy Memorial Day, I understand like the well-meaning intent behind it. I understand the heart attached to it. That's the day that they are reminded of the loss that they had. Like you get the news any day that your partner is gone. You can get the news any day that dad's not coming home. That is a heavy enough day as it is. Memorial Day shows up and also says something about it too. And how do so many individuals talk about it? How do they approach it? What is the stance that we should have as a culture when it comes to grieving? We understand happiness. I am not. I'm pretty sure America gets how to do Christmas. We're getting really enthusiastic about Halloween. We got Halloween down pat. Thanksgiving, bro, we have perfected that across the planet. Nobody does Thanksgiving like we do. Holidays for grieving our past, are for grieving the people we've lost. Canadians have a Remembrance Day, a day that is almost like the blend of Veterans Day and Memorial Day, where you honor both the people who are still with us and the people who have passed, the service members who are gone. Those those are also grieving days, and I'm not convinced that our immediate community is filled with anything but good intentions. Meanwhile, what if, and here's part of my hope in the article for anyone else, like my hope is not that another person who is surviving grief is working through grief. I hope that they don't read this. Instead, I hope that this becomes something they can feed off to that one friend who always says something kooky and insensitive. And they're like, I cannot deal with that friend right now. Go read this and then come back to me. Now, that's a different level of friendship than what I imagine you and your friend had in the hot tub. But also, it's also very important to honor those differences in intimacy levels. Like if you're struggling with the loss of a child, if you've had a miscarriage of some kind, don't try to make other people happy. Don't worry about the emotional energy put out to being polite. For you and I, Jeff, we don't have to necessarily worry about that piece of advice, but for others, they are living with automatic tapes that are helping their behaviors go through. Like you don't watch a lot of movies where people are celebrating or going through grief as a holiday. But we do see a lot of Christmas. We do see a lot of Thanksgiving. And when it comes to working through those feelings, And not to be insensitive, if for any reason you out there viewers are are that friend, if you happen to know it, great. I'm glad you have that self-awareness. Um, there's another bit of advice there too. Like, check in with your own feelings. We as a culture, I'm going to throw Americans under the bus. Like, we don't talk about our feelings very well. We don't. You ask the average individual how many feeling words they know. It's not nearly what we have in the English lexicon. But if you also speak to Germans and like just explore their dictionary of feelings, there are more words, more nuances that their language has pulled up. So take time to start naming those feelings.
As a supporter, you mean your feelings as a supporter?
Yes, as a supporter, take time to go name your feelings. If you're feeling excited about the sale on Memorial Day, know that you're feeling excited. Say that to yourself so that when somebody is losing it during the parade or during the ceremony, you're not going to go over to them and try to show excitement or try to express something. Those types of um, distancing behaviors, that's not helpful for anybody. That's not useful. That's also one of the reasons why articles like this exist, or why Dr. Warden and Therese Randau and the other researchers are named. It's why these people dedicate this time to studying how to react to grief. We got
Is
happiness
there a
down.
science to it though? Like to me, if somebody is authentic and transparent and speaking from the heart, I prefer that to any kind of like right or wrong way of doing things. Even if they're saying something that's hard to hear or maybe strikes up a negative feeling, if it's coming from the heart and they're well intentioned and it's authentically how they're feeling or thinking in the moment, I would take that over any kind of etiquette that they're just performing for me for my benefit or my perceived benefit.
And that's wonderful. Like, that's important to know about yourself. That's an important part of the experience of living that is Jeff. Um, is there a science to counseling?
Well, a
I would
science to
say,
like the
yeah.
right or wrong thing to say or way to feel about something like grief.
Yeah, there's not a science to right or wrong when it comes to how do you support somebody through grief. Yeah, grief counselors would agree that they train, that they support, that
Well,
there
if
is a
they're telling
practice that
people
they
not to
do.
have Kleenex boxes, they're not. They are. I am not their audience, and my
Right,
friends were not their audience. Like in New Orleans, we have
right.
the second lines. When somebody dies, everybody goes out in the street and has a huge party. They have brass bands that play and dance and celebrate. It's a
Wow,
celebration of that person's
that's
life, and that's what I
beautiful.
want after I die. I want people to party their ass off, have fun, celebrate.
That's
Don't mope and
great.
cry over me. And so
I
I
might
think
have
there's a
a few
cultural
tears
element too
though.
that they tend to universalize and don't see that it's limited to a specific culture or class, maybe. Now,
But Jeff,
go
I
ahead.
might be I might be sad if you pass soon.
Well, you can be sad,
I
but
would not want.
I do want you to do something fun and like that's what my mom tells us. Like she's like, when I die, I don't want anyone to cry. I want you to throw a big party and celebrate. And I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I promised her I would do that. So I don't know how I'm actually going to feel. I probably
Yeah.
will be very, very sad, but I'm going to
Hmm.
honor my, like, I am going to try as best I can to do what she asked and give her what she wanted and try to enjoy and celebrate. And with Mike,
Hmm.
he was the only child, and his mom and I were both there the night he passed, and I
Mm.
watched a mother lose her only child in front of my eyes,
Yeah.
and that kind of bonded us. Like we had this trauma bond together, and so I got to watch her grief process as well. And she was one of my biggest supporters through my grief process. And even though we had a different relationship to Mike and our
Mm-hmm.
grief processes were different, it was good to see somebody else go through the exact same, like the experience of grief with the same exact person that I was and how they were handling too. So I kind
I
of got
was
my own perspective on grief, and then I got one through watching hers, and we stayed in touch for years and years. She eventually passed away as well.
mm, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, in an interesting way, you got to experience three flavors of grief because you got your experience, you got to witness hers, and that third one was that you shared it together. It's a it's a third, it's that a second relationship. That trauma bond becomes something that you share with this other person. And it is another layer of grieving that we get to experience that back and forth of watching somebody else go through it. Because it's not just this if she were going through it alone, it's that she was going through it and she was sharing it with you and she got to witness you going through it. Because sometimes we lose sight of the fact that these emotions are in us. They're not something anyone can put into you. You
Mm-hmm.
can inspire a feeling in somebody else, but if you happen to be having the same feeling as somebody else, that is really rare, but you're not having the feeling together. The same way you and I could actually eat the same pizza, we're not having the same feeling, but you are sharing that moment. And that in itself is a beautiful experience. That becomes a hard one to replace in any way. Like in itself, each grieving process is unique, but getting to share it with someone like that, like you were describing, that seems beautiful.
Grief is also one of the most profound emotions that I think humans can experience. And she was the mother-in-law. Like me and her were rivals. We did not like each other for years. In fact, Mike had to keep us apart. I didn't answer her phone calls. He took her calls. I didn't like we had like a no contact. And during those final days when she came down to stay with him, it got very tense, and it
Mm.
we were not people that liked each other. We had nothing in common, and we were battling the whole time. We did not like it, but going through this experience together, even we were politically opposites. Like every single value we had could not have been more opposite. But going through this process together, even though we knew we were not each other's favorite person, we were not even friends, we were borderline enemies. We had a bond that united us through the grief that transcended all of that. And I developed such a respect for her despite everything that had come between us. And I think it was the same for her on my end. Like she had to overcome a lot that she felt about me that was negative. And because this grief was so profound, it was able to
Mhm.
do that for us.
That's amazing. I believe that might be one of the signs that we can take for ourselves and say, I mean, profundity in any feeling is a sign that it's never just simple. It's
Mhm.
never just grief. It's never just happiness. It's never just anything. And the more we find, and I don't know anything about the relationship other than what you've told me, but I've had rivals in the past. And the more we can find to share and connect and relate to someone else, and even as I say those words, I can hear how one dimensional it sounds. But the more messy and complicated a picture of somebody else that we have in ourselves, the better we are able to empathize with that person. Like they're never just the insurance salesman guy. They're never just the barista. They are never just the grieving widow.
I mean,
And
I've
that
found in my
becomes,
life, and I believe this about everybody, there's always some bridge you can find. Like
mm-hmm,
as multidimensional and rich as humans are, it doesn't matter who the person you're sitting next to on the bus, if you talk long enough, there's going to be one or two little points of contact that you can start bridging into them as a person. And so I've always looked for those things in everybody because I'm always on the outside looking in. So I have to be
Yeah.
the one to find those little bridges to connect
Right.
myself because they're rarely able to do it for me, like initiate the process.
And sometimes the bus ride will be a long one. Like you may be working through that for a while. And that's okay too. Sometimes it's about measuring how much energy you want to put into it. Sometimes life is a really long bus ride and we've got time with those individuals. I think often I do get a lot of different flavors of advice where people remind me about how short life can be. And that's something we think about on Memorial Day. But also, I have lately heard a couple of friends tell me, don't forget about how long life can be. You've got time, or this moment is something that can be worth investing in. This moment can be like this person right now, they may not be somebody that you can share a lot with, but this bus ride, you don't know how long you got together. Consider it worth the investment to take time with somebody. And yeah, I love the idea of building as complicated and messy an idea of another person because if you've got a very simple way to describe who this other person is in your life, I'm willing to bet there might be more to them and more to your relationship with them than you know.
There usually is, and life is short, and we see it. Like I've seen life be very short, but subjectively, it also feels very long too. Like I feel like I've already lived several hundred years, and I'm
Mm.
not sure how much I have left. But even the years I've lived up to this point, it seemed like a really long amount of life that I was very fortunate to have. So it's
Mm.
both. It's really a I don't even know if you'd call it a paradox, but it's because it's so subjective. It's all of it at the same time.
Mm. I'll say it's seemingly contradictory, but it makes room for all of the different variety. It's very varied.
I mean, it's
It's
all we
very
have. It's
varied.
whatever
Yeah.
it is. It's all we have, and it's all we have with anybody.
And truly, I believe the pursuit of peace, I'm going to blow the conversation really wide. Uh, the pursuit of peace may be the best way to honor the fallen soldiers. I know that as much as we work to bridge some differences, the bus ride is not long enough for us to finally get there. But the belief that it can happen, that there can be something there, I mean, that's part of what the pursuit is. But there's not a formula, there's never a simple solution. There's a relationship to be built. And that relationship is a give and take, a tit for tat. Sometimes you build up a relationship to the point where you do things in order to support the relationship itself, not necessarily because it helps you or transactionally it makes sense. And those types of relationships, those are rare, but recognizing at the very top of that relationship cycle, at the very pinnacle of it, is um, moving past a transactional understanding of this barista, the car salesman guy, the all that, to the point where you say, all right, this is another human being. I'm going to invest in getting to know them. This is another country full of human beings. I just said it really funny, human beings, but there's another country of them. Let me get to know them. Let me develop a relationship with them. Sometimes that is messy, decades long, ugly work. I mean, there's two layers to every international conflict. There's what we do, what we do with the bullets and guns, and then there's also what we did with talk and diplomacy beforehand. And it's not, that's another way that we as humans try to bridge the gap across the bus aisle. And it's sometimes like Why are they celebrating this? Why are they behaving in such a way on these other holidays where it transgresses my understanding of how being human works? And you can't be celebrating that on that day. Well, the less we hold to the things that drive our inner experience, and the more willing we are to put our feelings in the backseat of the bus and go, okay, how do I meet what this other individual seems to need? Sometimes I don't get any signals from other people either. So I'm just straight up observing, listening, reading the tread on the shoes and asking them, hey, I know you got your school backpack, but it's a Saturday. Where are you going? What do you need? Um, I know we're getting close to the hour mark. I wanted to ask you a little bit about when you have somebody who is walking into your life and saying, hey, here's advice on how to deal with grief. What would you tell that person?
Kind of what I said at the beginning. Like they're not an expert in me. I don't know what they trained in, but they didn't train in me. I mean, they're a total stranger until they get to know me. And so I guess a little bit of intellectual humility, realize that there's no one universal way to approach, I think, anything in the humanities, but particularly something as individualized as grief. Now, I can be very gracious. I can understand that they're coming from a
Yeah,
particular perspective, but like with the Kleenex box, it was the kind of condescending, patronizing attitude of you're doing it wrong. Like when they set up their way of doing it as the standard, and then they judge your way of doing it on how far short you fall of that. That introduces an element that I truly find unhelpful more than anything else.
I believe there might be in in grief counselor jail. There probably is a wall and a long list of things written on that wall that every group counselor wishes they could take back. You're doing it wrong. In what world?
I mean, it's the principle of meeting someone where they are, and
Yeah.
being able to kind of discover that is going to
Mhm.
take precedence over any rules or right way of doing things that you're trained in or taught.
If I were going to be dogmatic about anything, it might be that principle. The dogmatism is work hard to figure out meeting how to meet somebody where they are.
And if
Don't
you
walk in with
can't,
answers.
like, do your best, but if you can't, just be on, like, just honesty. Just don't let them know where you are, at least. Just
Mm-hmm.
communicate where you are, and then they can figure out what to do from there.
And for the outsider's perspective, I think this other point I want to make is important. If this is for you, listener, pay attention to it. Because a grieving person is working through something and they are rude to you, they are angry at you, if they dismiss you, that's not shutting the door on the relationship.
Mhm.
It's okay if a grieving widow wants to hit you with a chair, and she does. It doesn't mean that a year from then you won't be friends.
And don't take it personally.
Yeah.
When I was like fresh in the grieving process, I'd say the first several probably months, I didn't. This was new to me. I didn't know what I needed or what was
No.
helpful or what I want. So I just whatever anyone tried to do that seemed helpful, I appreciated. But I couldn't even tell somebody what I needed because I didn't know myself. I was just lost. It was a totally different
Yeah.
world for me. So it's
In that.
collaborative too. Like the grieving person may
Mhm.
not know, you may not know. Together, just collaborate on figuring it out and just keep being helpful in the forefront.
My latest experiment has always been on finding ways to ground abstractions. And sometimes one of those abstractions is how do we sit down and figure it out? Like sometimes the sitting down and just holding their hand and watching this person evolve. As Jeff said earlier, grief is changing. grief transforms. It's not instantaneous. So you may literally be holding one person, hugging them, and then the person you let go is somebody else. Whatever happens during that time, it's their personal journey. And recognizing it is by far the most important thing any of us can do when that grief is fresh or when it comes back. Like a cloud burst, sometimes grief
Hmm.
will hit
When
me
it
and
does come back.
I walk out, I need space, and I don't go anywhere and do anything. I can shut down because of grief. And working through that process is hard and it takes a long time. And if you happen to be the fortunate person to be a witness in those moments, like recognize you're holding something as precious. It's like being, like you should walk into those moments with the type of awe that a first time surgeon who's witnessing somebody else do open heart surgery on another human being, having that type of wonder to say, I am in the very personal space of another human being, another dignified, dignity bound individual who matters. We're going to try to save their life, and I should be like right now. Open heart surgery looks messy and it's scary, and all the other things that go with it. But recognizing that there's a level of awe and wonder, I think that's a good posture to have when you happen to be the one receiving the chair from a grieving widow.
It is a form of sacred space, or it felt like it at least. And the thing that helped me most, like, and this was after the immediate aftermath, as I was forming that new identity, was getting re-involved back into society, not isolating, not retreating, not withdrawing, but finding activities,
Yeah.
going out with friends, like whatever little steps you can take to start getting back to some kind of active, normal life. And I was worried in the beginning that I had become too changed of a person. Like I was so different from the Jeff people had come to know, and that I had this dark
Oh.
cloud over me. And I was kind of this wet blanket on everything. And people were very patient, very tolerant, and understanding. And if somebody is fresh in grief and they are giving that impression, it's probably not permanent. If you could just sit with it, stay with it, let them evolve out of it, help them get engaged in new things, and eventually that, like, it's not going to be a permanent thing. So to the extent that you can support them through that, that was helpful too.
That's
Because the
beautiful
grieving
because it sounds.
person himself or herself probably feels a stigma of being the sole person in grief or having this experience that nobody else is having, that has the potential to be very negative for other people.
Oh, sure. I mean, when it comes to a culture that says good vibes only or sharing positive psychology, that kinds of thing, sometimes the best thing you can do is be tender and kind and handling other people gingerly as much as possible. Right? That's why it's easy for friend groups to solidify on having that one friend you put down or
The
something like that.
scapegoat.
Like that, I would argue for anybody, or maybe this is a whole other video, but try your best, humanity, to stop doing that.
It's part of being
Everybody.
human. Just like tribalism and status seeking. It's like I even find myself doing it in the right context. I think becoming aware of it and being able to identify, talk through it, and perhaps transcend it through some
Mm-hmm.
kind of collaborative effort. But I mean,
Yeah,
we all have bias. We all scapegoat. We all have
we all
status.
can. Yeah, and having the like, if we can be, if you've watched this video all the way through, it's a hour and nine, almost an hour and 10 minutes. If you can take away one thing, just be 1% kinder. being 1% kinder all the time might be what the stranger in the Starbucks line needs.
Or even if it's not all the time, I think 1% kinder 30% of the time still adds a little, like it's,
You're still contributing.
yes, you're still contributing. Well, that's a very optimistic note to end on. So I want to thank you once again for coming and talking about this. And if there's any, I put the article in the description. If you have any other things you want to promote or announce or any social media sites you want me to include, just send them to me and I'll add them as well.
Well, if anything, I'd recommend everybody connect with a mental health professional, make a bridge, and if you do find yourself in the group of neurodivergent individuals and you're like, how do I connect with other people who seem to think like me? Because this article was crap for me. How do I connect with more people? Like, let me show you. Let me
Come
tell
and
you.
see
There's
us.
yeah.
We meet every Friday, 7 p.m. You can contact me for the link. We
Mm-hmm.
also do movies and all kind of other fun activities throughout the week.
Precisely.
Do you want me to put the
Well,
Bright
that's it.
Insight website as well?
Yes, please. Yeah, definitely. Bright insight. And yeah, that's all I got to promote.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you again. I hope you do have a good Memorial Day, whatever you
Thank
end up
you. Thank you
doing.
very much. I appreciate that, man. Thank you, Jeff. This was a beautiful time.
You too.
Have
Thank
a
you
good
so
day.
much. I'll talk to you later.